even though the intended scope of the Code of Practice was to stop at the farm gate. Section 8 takes us past the gate, focusing on transportation. The Code Development Committee felt that horse owners and caregivers play a critical role in ensuring that horses are properly prepared and fit for transport long before they get on a trailer. This section is wide-reaching, as it applies to commercial haulers and individual transporters alike. It will also have specific provisions for either loose-hauled horses or halter-loaded horses. The federal requirements for animal transport are covered under the Health of Animals Regulations Part 12. They are enforced by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency with the assistance of other federal, provincial, and territorial authorities. Some provinces have additional regulations related to animal transport. Per the Health of Animals Regulations, each person responsible for transporting animals or arranging for their transport must ensure that no part of the transportation process is detrimental to the welfare of the animals. If you are responsible for loading, transporting, or unloading animals, you must be familiar with and follow Canada's animal transport requirements. Your vehicle is subject to inspection at any time, and if you do not comply with the regulations, you could be fined or even criminally prosecuted, including under the Criminal Code of Canada or provincial legislation if your actions or neglect are considered animal abuse. The Health of Animals Act Part 12 was updated and came into enforcement in February of 2020. A full list of the regulations can be found on the Canadian Food Inspection Agency's website or on the resource page of this website. Transport begins long before the horse steps onto the trailer. You are responsible for making sure the horse is healthy and fit for the journey. Your horse should be trained to load and unload, lessening the stress and decreasing the chance of injury to the horse and the handler. And you must ensure the trailer the horse is being transported in is appropriate and safe. Per Canadian transport regulations, it is the responsibility of everyone involved to ensure that all animals are fit for the intended journey. This includes the owner, the transporter, and the person doing the loading. Horse owners and the person transporting the horse have the primary responsibility of determining if an animal is fit for the expected duration of the trip. While the driver should not be relied upon to determine whether the horse is fit for transport, they have the right and responsibility to refuse to load a horse that they recognize as unfit for transport. You cannot load horses that have a reduced capacity to withstand transportation. This may be due to injury, fatigue, infirmity, poor health, distress, liable to give birth, or any other cause. This means you can never transport a horse unless you are sure it is healthy enough to withstand the stress of the entire journey, including any intermediate stops such as auction markets. Each horse must be judged individually for fitness and in the context of each trip and relevant factors such as length of trip and weather. The welfare of the horse must always be the first consideration. Here is an example of a decision tree provided within the code to help you make the decisions on the fitness of a horse. As you can see, examples of conditions that would deem a horse unfit include fractures, severe lameness, fever, colic, emaciation, prolapses, or a non-ambulatory horse, to name a few. A compromised horse is a horse that may be able to be transported, but only under special conditions. This includes horses that are blind in both eyes, very young foals or orphan foals, geriatric horses, lame horses, or a horse that has any condition that could reduce the horse's ability to withstand the rigors of the trip. These horses must only be transported locally and directly to the nearest suitable place where they can receive care and attention, or be humanely slaughtered or euthanized. They must be the last animal loaded and the first animal unloaded, and they must be segregated from all other animals or penned with one familiar animal. Depending on the condition of the horse, you may also have to provide bedding. If you are not sure whether a horse is fit for the trip, do not transport. Contact a veterinarian. You can also print off the transport decision tree located on the resource page of this website, or reference the Health of Animals Act Part 12, which clearly lists all conditions that are considered unfit or compromised for transport. When animals are unfit for transport, you must not transport the animal, and you must provide treatment or, if necessary, euthanize the animal. It is illegal to load or unload a non-ambulatory animal unless the animal is being transported with special provisions for veterinary treatment or diagnosis. We are now going to address how to prepare your horse for transport. Preparation for transport starts long before the trip actually begins. Management factors such as lameness prevention, training to load, nutrition, and other factors have a collective impact on fitness to transport and should be considered as a whole. Under the new transportation regulations, horses are only allowed to be off feed and water for a maximum of 28 hours. The clock starts from when the horse last has access to feed and water and stops when the horse has access again to feed and water following transport. Per Canadian transport regulations, all horses must be provided with feed in an amount appropriate to its age and condition, and in amounts that are sufficient to prevent a nutritional deficit. You must also provide safe water in amounts that are sufficient to prevent the animal from becoming dehydrated. Those responsible for arranging transport need to consider how long the horses will be in transit until their final destination, and any additional services that may be required, such as feed, water, or rest. If in doubt, assume the longest trip. Your pre-transport checklist should include checking the vaccination and health status requirements for your destination well in advance of the transport date, particularly for transport to another country or province. You should avoid any changes in diet immediately before or during a trip. And you will want to pack extra feed and water in case there are any unanticipated delays during transport. Develop a contingency plan before each trip, including contact details for veterinarians and local authorities along the route, information on rest stops where horses can be unloaded, rested, fed, and watered, and maps or other navigation systems for alternate route planning. You should also keep a first aid kit in the transport vehicle. If you are using protective equipment, such as wraps and shipping boots, ensure that the equipment fits the horse correctly and comfortably. You should also acclimate the horse to wearing the equipment before training to load or transport. When arranging transport, horse owners and managers have a responsibility to ensure that the transporter is trained and qualified. You should make sure that only trained personnel load, unload, and transport your horses. Make sure that all required paperwork is completed and provided to the transporter. The required paperwork varies, so you will need to refer to your provincial authority and the health of animals regulations to determine what you need. You will want to ensure that the loading facilities are compatible with the type of trailer being used and that the facilities are safe for loading. Some trailers will require loading ramps, and they must be at the same level as the entry into the trailer. When arranging for transport, the consignor and transporter must agree upon the number of horses being transported, class of horses, such as if they are stallions or yearlings, the time and location of where the horses will be loaded and the destination, any special considerations for the horses being transported, and if protection from extreme temperatures is needed, especially for foals and geriatrics. Section 8.2 is going to address loading and unloading. Research on farm animal transport shows that loading and unloading are stressful components of transport. A combination of stressors can occur in a short period of time, including exposure to unfamiliar surroundings and animals. Injuries are also of concern, as a horse may slip or fall during the process. The code requires that all requirements for loading and unloading procedures and equipment as described in the Health of Animals regulations must be complied with. And remember, horses must be individually assessed for fitness before loading and upon arrival back to the farm. Those who handle horses during or pre-transport must be trained in preparation, loading, and unloading practices. To be responsible for transporting horses, horse owners and caregivers must be experienced and knowledgeable, or must access the assistance of qualified persons. For loading facilities, you must ensure that the roads and loading areas are accessible in all kinds of weather, the loading facilities have gentle ramps, and they are uniformly lit to avoid sharp contrasts and shadows. Horses should be handled calmly and quietly during loading and unloading. Vehicles should be cleaned and sanitized between uses, especially if transporting horses of different origins. And for vehicles requiring horses to step up, you should use a rubber bumper to prevent injuries as they take the step up into the trailer. When loading loose horses, you will need to determine the proper loading density based on the current standards within the Code of Practice for the care and handling of farm animals transportation, and only ship pre-socialized horses together in a compartment. One of the most challenging aspects of halter-loaded horses is training the horses to load. Horses, well trained to the halter, should be taught loading procedures well before the anticipated date of transport, and should actually be part of basic training. Horses that have had a positive experience loading are often less fearful than horses loaded for the first time. Training to load also facilitates loading during an emergency. Suggested techniques for training to load include teaching the horse to lead, stop, turn in both directions, and back up in hand before asking the horse to load in a vehicle. Ensure the vehicle entrance is wide and well lit, as horses are claustrophobic by nature and do not like to go into small dark boxes. Try and use a trailer that is large and open during the initial training, and load an experienced horse first, if possible, as the horse in training may be more apt to load following a familiar companion. Load and unload the horse several times to reinforce training, and use caution when closing the trailer, as some horses may panic. And as discussed in training theory, consider using positive reinforcement, such as giving the horse a food reward when the horse loads successfully. When a horse arrives at their destination, it is important that their overall health and condition be monitored. Research suggests that transport itself, or the multiple management changes associated with transport, such as new surroundings, physical constraint, and deprivation of water and feed, can predispose horses to colic and respiratory disease. The code requires that horses must be provided with water upon arrival to the farm or at destination. The code also recommends that you avoid changes in feed shortly after transport to allow the horse to settle. Recently transported horses should be carefully monitored for dehydration, wounds, signs of colic, fever, or respiratory disease, particularly after long-distance transport or when horses of different origin were mixed. It is also a recommended practice to segregate new arrivals from resident horses for at least 7 days and monitor their health status. You have now reached the end of this section of the Equine Code of Practice training series. Please click the button below to return to the main Equine Code of Practice training page.